Hello, and welcome to End User Computing on Nutanix, enabling HCA to focus on innovation. My name is Brian Sir. I'm a Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Nutanix. I have Jonathan here with me. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. My name's Jonathan Johnston, and I'm a consulting engineer for HCA Healthcare on the end user compute team. My primary focus is the infrastructure, designing and implementing Nutanix and VMware technologies that support our end user workloads. You can find out some more about me on my LinkedIn profile, which should be shown here on the slide. So HCA Healthcare is one of the nation's leading providers of healthcare services, comprising 184 hospitals and approximately 2,000 sites of care across 21 states. HCA was founded in 1968 and is based out of Nashville, Tennessee. Above all else, we are committed to the care and improvement of human life.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was a great intro on yourself and HCA. Now let's just discuss a little bit about your deployment in your environment. We'll start off with some questions. Which type of types of end users and workloads are you running on Nutanix today?
We are running a little bit of everything. We have Citrix Zen App, Citrix Zen Desktop, and VMware Horizon View deployed, all are which unique environments, no crossover. For the most part, our users are clinical staff. We are not so much focused on corporate end users, technical staff. This is designed for users at a facility, physicians, and other staff that are directly providing patient care.
Great. So you've got a variety where you're using apps, desktops from Citrix, and then desktops through Horizon.
Yeah.
Could you give us, best that you can, some details about the size of your environment? Maybe types of users, whatever count you can talk about.
Sure. As a large enterprise, we are comprised of multiple hundred Nutanix nodes at this point. Those nodes are split across the three environments that I just referenced. We are supporting multiple tens of thousands of unique users. Our deployments are spread across multiple data centers. We've had some challenges there in figuring out how to best connect the workloads and share the data.
Great. And next, a bit about which hypervisors you use on the cluster. Obviously, we know you use the VMware on the Horizon one. Can you tell us what you use below the Citrix workloads?
ESXi as well for those workloads. With the number of hosts that we are deploying and managing, it is much easier to know one stack. AHV has some very positive processes, and security is great there. But knowing at a deep level how to troubleshoot and deploy the two different technologies is challenging. So for now, we've stuck with ESXi for all of our workloads.
Yeah, it makes sense with the different environments. I totally get your reasoning there. Can you tell us a bit? Do you have any standards for the size of clusters that you build, and maybe it's even different between the environments?
It is a little bit different. Unfortunately, some of our early builds really didn't have a standard. Like any other company deploying a new technology, HCA had to learn as we went. And looking back at clusters and environments we deployed 3 or 4 years ago, obviously there's some things that we wish we had known then and could have implemented. That being said, we've done our best to standardize on our deployment. We have a couple of different cluster sizes, as far as number of nodes, depending on what the workload would be. Infrastructure cluster is one size. A Zen app cluster is going to be slightly larger, and a desktop cluster is a third size again. The one commonality that we are trying to implement is to make sure we have high availability in all of our designs. In the Nutanix space, that includes having RF3 and block awareness for all of our clusters. One of the ways we have implemented that is to split a Nutanix block across multiple clusters. We are, at this time at least, only using the NX 3060 series of hardware, which has 4 nodes per block. So for example, we will take 2 desktop clusters and have cluster 1 on the Alpha and Bravo nodes in the block, and cluster 2 goes to Charlie Delta nodes of the block. And doing that, we're able to easily obtain block awareness even for a smaller size cluster.
Okay. And you mentioned you had some different cluster sizes between like a VDI environment and an app environment. I don't know if there's any reasoning. Maybe it's just like user account, or is it VM density, or just number of nodes? You don't have to dig in like what the count is. Maybe what your reasoning was.
Sure, there's multiple reasons. Some of it has to do with the software limits. On the Horizon side, for instance, there's a published maximum of number of sessions you can have per vCenter. So we've had to factor that in. Some of it just has to do with resources. We don't want to max our host and clusters down at 100%. You have to have a balanced threshold to allow for failover. So there was several days spent running math to figure out how best we could fit the workloads into the resources we had. Some of that's come out in our Zen app workload, where we may only have 15 or 20 session hosts per physical node. Whereas on a desktop cluster, depending on the hardware, you may have 200 plus desktops.
Makes great sense. Thanks for that. So, with really 3 distinct environments and different gold images between them, sharing your gold image between the clusters within in each environment, kind of keeping them up to date, must be somewhat of a challenge. Can you explain to us? Do you have a process for that? How do you make your life easier there?
Thankfully, for the Citrix side, we really aren't sharing the images too much. For Citrix, we only use PVS. So it's been a little easier to manage, at least the way we do things. We make sure that we replicate our PVS servers for DR. And if we need to restore or anything, we recover the PVS server, can pull the images off of it, and run the VM streamed wizard setup to deploy new machines. On the Horizon side, we're using a series of scripts and some other logic to replicate those golden images around and make sure everything stays in sync.
Okay, super. Always a challenge for everyone. Can you
Yes.
tell me a little bit about DR? I think you mentioned you do protect some things with DR, so maybe you can kind of explain a little bit about what you do for the different workloads. Maybe use built-in replication for some of it, others maybe use something at the app level.
We do utilize the Nutanix replication, and it was one of the easiest setups I've had to perform. Um, Very small scale. We're not replicating a large amount of data in our environment. As I referenced before, it's really just the Citrix PVS servers, and we're only doing that so we have remote capability to restore those images for a DR event. Uh, the Nutanix setup for the data protection was very straightforward. It's very easy to select the VM, replicate it, and after much discussion, we decided that was suitable for our needs. We have a sufficient SLA for recovery that um, we can easily restore the PVS server, pull those images out, and provision VMs. On the Horizon side, we've actually implemented an active-active setup instead of the traditional active-passive that we use in the Citrix space. We have Horizon pools configured in primary data center as well as the failover data center. Those pools are always online, always accessible. and using some of the VMware technologies that they've incorporated into Horizon, specifically the cloud pod architecture. We're able to have those pools provisioned, and it's basically a seamless transition for a user if something happens to the primary site.
Great. That is excellent. So, I heard you mention PBS. There's always user profiles, things like that, where you need some type of file server in there. Are you using Nutanix Files yet? Have you given it a look, at some of these potential use cases?
We are looking at it. I've configured 3 or 4 different versions now in our QA environment and played around with. Our use case for files be slightly different than what you may think. You mentioned user profiles. For us on the Citrix side, everything's non-persistent. We're not retaining those user profiles. Again, this environment is designed for clinical staff. They're in, performing a series of tasks, and they're out. They're not accessing email, for the most part, not on the internet with a web browser. It's very streamlined. The one reason we are considering files, though, is for the user environment manager aspect of Horizon and having config data specifically. Again, not so much worried about profiles, but the config data for printers and maybe network shares and different things that we want to replicate across various data centers. So it's
Great.
still
Makes
early
sense.
on, but there may be a use case for it.
Okay. And maybe next you can talk a little bit about, the migration or deployment experience, right? I know some of these may be in new environments, some you migrated. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how the 3 different environments, how you got from if you were running somewhere else before, onto running under Nutanix.
For the most part, we've implemented a software refresh along with the hardware. So it was pretty straightforward to have a new Nutanix cluster setting on the sidelines, build it up, make sure everything was good from the hardware, and then we deploy our software stack. In a few very fringe cases, we have migrated VMs over. That's seamless. Just run a vMotion from the existing cluster under the vCenter over to the new Nutanix cluster. We've not had any issues with that. But for probably 95% of our use cases at this point, it's been a net new build, and it worked really well for us. It's not something that every company could do, I realize, but if you have the option, it's a little easier to build things up instead of trying to shuffle hardware and software versions around to get the upgrades completed.
Great. Yeah, I think if things time out, like you mentioned, it is an excellent time to make changes like that. So, can you talk a little bit about application performance? Did you see any, changes after you moved any of the environments over to Nutanix?
Yes, we did. Unfortunately, one of those changes was negative, and I would like to touch on that for a minute as well. But overall, it's been very positive. The one negative experience we had to do with someone not fully understanding the workload. And while this is a negative comment, I want to iterate that everyone needs to spend some time and understand the workload before they make a decision on which hardware and what they're going to run. The negative experience we had ended up being due to the CPU that was chosen for the hardware. And we were experiencing CPU wait times, that were much higher than expected. Applications were performing sluggish, migrated over to a different Nutanix hardware, and issues went away. At which point, we had fairly well isolated what was happening. We just had to dig in a little deeper and compare some of the CPU specs between our previous hardware generation and the chosen Nutanix hardware. But other than that one use case, that one experience, everything has been very positive. We are running all flash nodes. So, comparing a previous SAN that was all flash, we're actually much faster on the Nutanix all flash than the SAN over fiber channel. One example of that is Citrix PBS, doing the streamed VM wizard, deploying multiple hundred VMs and then powering those on all at once. It's a process that can take some time on traditional storage, even if that is SSD attached storage. And our times on Nutanix were about 50% faster.
That's great to hear. This brings us to our last question, and can you tell me a little bit about your, support experience? Right, everyone has issues. You mentioned the one with the, having the maybe not the most ideal CPU chosen for a cluster, and you moved it, and it was much better. But maybe talk a little bit about, what that experience has been like with Nutanix support.
Overall, extremely positive. I think every company out there has challenges at the support level. Every company who may be watching this presentation has probably experienced some of those when they're calling their vendors. But personally and as a company, our experience with Nutanix has been very positive. We have a great account team, which is definitely helped some of that. We have a technical account manager that we can go to, and he knows some of the support staff to pull in depending on the issue we have. As far as the one negative experience that I referred to with the CPUs, we within a day or so, I think, of opening a case to troubleshoot with Nutanix, we had one of the top performance guys on the phone with us, and that's what really helped drive home that the CPU that was selected was not ideal for the workload we were attempting to run. So what turned into a frustrating experience for us as we were trying to troubleshoot, very quickly turned into, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. Not only is he telling us what is wrong, but he's providing data, and not just Nutanix data, but even third-party data to validate those claims. So it was, while there was still a little bit of frustration at the overall issue and, okay, what happened? Why isn't the workload performing how we thought? What did we not understand? Everything quickly became positive, and we realized what we had to do going forward to avoid a situation like that.
Super. All great stuff, Jonathan. I want to thank you for spending some time with us today and talking about your experiences and your environment. I think it's beneficial for all of us. Thanks again.
Thank you, Brian.